Good day, everyone. I am Mr. Mark Anthony Idalumpinis, your instructor for this course, Research in Daily Life 2. I'm back for another lecture. In today's lecture, I will be discussing to you the topic sampling frames. So we will be discussing the different sampling frames in quantitative research. Let's start with defining what is sampling. Okay, what is sampling? Sampling is a process of selecting a representative by giving each member of the population equal chances of being selected. In conducting research class, it is very hard for you to include the entire population in your data gathering, in your research. Um, it's very hard to distribute questionnaire checklists to the entire population. That is why researchers apply the process or apply sampling, which is the process of selecting representative of the entire population by giving each member of the population equal chances of being selected. It is a scientific process, diba? A scientific process of selecting the representative of the entire population by means of giving each member the equal chance of being selected. And that process is called sampling. A sample is the output of sampling. But out from conducting sampling, you can now determine or you can identify your sample. Sample is the identified as part of the population which is selected to provide data for the population. Like the population you conducted sampling, and then after conducted sampling, you can now identify sample, which is the part of the population which serve as the representative of the entire population who will provide data for your research study. Advantages of sampling. So what are the advantages of sampling, diba? Um, researchers conduct sampling because of some advantages. So first, it entails lesser cost, lesser effort, and it is less time consuming. So as to efficiency, lesser cost, lesser effort, and less time consuming. Sampling is um into that. Diba? Sampling entails lesser cost because you don't need to distribute questionnaire checklists. You don't need to interview the whole population because you only can select representative who will represent the population, diba? So representative lang, so it is lesser cost, lesser effort, and then less time consuming. It is more practical to administer. Sampling is more practical to administer, and some experiments are destructive, so it is not possible to involve the whole population. That was the advantages of sampling, diba? Another, we will discuss it one by one. Now, it entails lesser cost, lesser effort, and it is less time consuming. Since the size of the sample is small compared to the population, the time, cost, and effort involved in a sample study are much less than the study done on a population. For population, huge fund is required because of the resources to be used, which may include more manpower and materials. It will also take a much shorter period of time to gather data from a sample than from a population, so it is less time consuming. Thus, sampling can lead to more well-timed results as well, especially to you, student researchers. It is advisable, diba? Um, to really apply sampling because for you to minimize cost, minimize your effort, and then for your data gathering procedure, for your data gathering period would be less time consuming. Now, once na advantages, na disadvantages sa sampling. And the disadvantages of sampling are the following. First, the biggest of which is that the sample may not truly reflect the characteristics of the population, and this would lead to wrong conclusion. The biggest of which is that the sample may not truly reflect the characteristics of the population, and this would lead to wrong conclusion. Um, Compared to considering the entire population, so once you consider the entire population, you can really get what is that um, more accurate data compared to sampling. Pero it is argued that still sampling can provide you accurate data basta provided you really follow the sampling procedures and then you really look for representative of the entire population. Kaya lang sa entire population, 'di ba? Without considering sampling, um ma-consider nimo ang tanan. 'Di ba? Lahi ra man ang tanan kumpara sa representative lang. But but considering your time, considering the cost, of course, we need to conduct sampling. Hence, care must be taken in choosing a sample, 'di ba? Um, in choosing a sample, in determining the sample size, care must be taken. A sample must be large enough to give a good representation of the population, but small enough to be manageable. Take note, care must be taken in choosing a sample. A sample must be large enough to give a good representation of the population, but small enough to be manageable. Diba? Must be large and must small enough. So take note. So in short, is in conducting sampling, diba? The number of respondents must be not too large but not too small. Huh? Okay, there are two types of sampling procedures. We have probability and non-probability sampling. When you say probability sampling, so this type of sampling uses statistics, diba, and probability. Whereas in non-probability is the opposite. It does not use any statistical method, diba, in conducting sampling. Let's see, probability sampling, one can specify for each element in the population the probability that will be included in the sample. So in probability sampling, in this type of sampling give equal chances for all members of the population to become chosen as part of the research. By using probability sampling, you give chance to all the members of the population to become chosen as part of the research because you are using probability sampling, diba? Probability, you determine the probable, diba? Who are these probable members or the probable participants or respondents of the study. So it gives equal chances for all members of the population to become chosen as part of the research. As what I've mentioned kanina, it uses also statistics and probability, di ba? Statistical method. Now, probability sampling includes the following: simple random sampling, systematic random sampling, stratified random sampling, cluster sampling, and last is multi-stage sampling. We will discuss each of these type of sampling one by one. Now, in simple random sampling, the term simple random sampling, it chooses a random number from a table or randomly selects individual from the whole population. So another term is lottery or raffle type. So draw lots, diba? Fishbowl method. This is what we call simple random sampling, wherein for example, the whole population is the whole senior high school students, diba? That is your whole population. And then you write a number, you write the name of the students, and then you put it in the box or in a fish bowl, and then you choose your respondents, diba? You choose the sample, um, by doing lottery type, meaning bunot-bunot, diba? Simple random sampling. Chooses random from a table or randomly selects individual from the whole population. That is what we call simple random sampling. So lottery type, raffle type, bunot-bunot. This is the simplest form of random sampling where a subset of size n of the population has an equal chance of being selected. A simple random sample can be done using fishbowl method or draw lots method or using random numbers. Pwede pod nga delete names imong gamiton. You assign number to each member of the population, and then you randomly select, you choose random numbers from a table or from a fishbowl or box. In drawing a simple random sample, the researcher is in effect mixing up the units in the population before a sample of n units is selected. The small n, it represents sample. Sample of n is selected. Small n is sample and big N is the population. Now you derive your small n or the sample out from your population through lottery or raffle type. Now steps in simple random sampling or SRS. Assign a number to each element of the population using the numbers from 1 to n. Select n numbers, diba? Select your n numbers or the sample from 1 to n using random process like fishbowl method or draw lots, or you can use random numbers which can be generated by a scientific calculator, or you can use also table of random numbers. You can also generate through scientific calculator the random numbers. You can use table of random numbers, and simple, you can simply do fishbowl or draw lots method. Next is systematic random sampling. Now, what is the difference? A simple random sampling. You just mix up the names of the members of the population or the assigned numbers, and then bunot-bunot nimo. Muna siya simple. But systematic, it involves a systematic process, the step-by-step process. Systematic random sampling. It is systematically chosen sample population. This is done by determining first sample needed in a given universe. When it's a universe, it also another term for population. This is done by determining first sample needed in a given universe. So the first thing in doing systematic random sampling is to determine the sample size through or using Sloven's formula or using sample size calculator. So determine first the sample size. Ibutang nato pag determine the sample size is equal to 9, diba? Equal to 9. N is equals to 9. Now, since n is equals to 9, you will now conduct systematic random sampling out from 50, diba? Out from 50 members of population. So, mapili na ka og 9. So, unsa imong buhaton? Kinsa imong pilion? Si number 1 ba? Number 2, number 3, number 4? So, sa 50. Now, si systematic random sampling, na siya pamaagi. Once the sample is set, which is 9, the individuals who will represent the sample are determined out from the population. So, through interval sampling, because systematic random sampling is also called interval sampling, and it means that there is a gap or interval between each selection. So there is a gap between the selection of the sample, the selection of the sample. Like for example, n is equals to 9, and then the first is I will show it later. It means that there is a gap. There is a gap between the first respondent to the next respondent. There is a gap or interval. Researchers obtain systematic samples by numbering each subject of the population and then selecting every kth element in the population where the first unit is chosen at random. Now, steps in taking a systematic random sample. Now, assign a number to each element of the population using the numbers from 1 to n. So, you are going to assign number, the same with simple random sampling. The second step is determine the sampling interval or k. So, you have to determine the sampling interval or k, where k or sampling interval k is equals to big N divided by n, where n is the population size and n is the sample, small n is the sample size. Note, if k is not a whole number, then it is rounded to the nearest whole number. For example, suppose the population size is equal to 400 and the sample size is 15. Now, to determine the sampling interval, so k is equals to 400 divided by 15 is equals to 26.67. Note, k is not a whole number, therefore it is rounded to the nearest whole number. That is, 26.67 is rounded off to the nearest whole number, 27. So the interval is 27. Now, step 3, select a random start where select a random start or R, diba? R represents the random start where where 1 is less than R, diba? 1 is less than random start. So dili ka pwede mag-start ni 1. 1 is less than R and then R is less than K, diba? The random start is less than the interval. Now the sample will include the rth element, and then the first sample will include the first R, diba? Equal to R. So the second is the R plus K, the R plus interval, that is the next, diba? And R plus 2K plus 3K, and then so on until you reach the desired sample size. Okay, example. In a population of 1,200 individuals, choose a systematic random sample of size 9. Now this is the solution. K is equals to population size divided by sample size, 1,200 divided by 9. The interval is 133.33. Since it is not whole number, we need to round it off to the nearest whole number, that is still 133. Diba? Kay 3 raman ang gasunod. Since k is equals to 133, the interval is 133, we have to determine the random start, which is R. The random start can be 1, 2, 3. And take note the random start can be 1, 2, 3 or 1 until 133. Take note of the in selecting random start. Random start where 1 is less than, diba, random start, and less than, the random start is less than k. So the k is 133, so pwede ka mangita og start from 2. So from 2, dili pwede, from 2, so kay 1, dili pwede si 1 because 1 should be less than R. So R should be greater than 1. So pwede ka maka-start from 2, 3, until 133. Now if you choose R is equal to 3, so now the random start is 3, diba? So the sample points, diba? The sample will be the third person. So start ani rth element, so the third person. Now the third person, 3 plus the interval 133 is 136. So your respondents will be, you are going to select 9 out from 1,200. The first is the 3, the third person. 3 plus 133, the interval or the key interval is 136. So 136th person, 136 plus 133, 269 plus 133, 402, 535, 668, 801, 934, 1067. So these are your respondents. The third person, 136th person, 269th person, 402nd person, and so on and so forth. That is how systematic random sampling conducted, or to be conducted. Now, stratified random sampling. Now, unsay kalahian ni simple random sampling o ni systematic random sampling as well as stratified random sampling? The simple lang, di ba? Simple random sampling, like bunot-bunot. So systematic na siya process. You have to determine the interval and then determine the random start and then determine your sample points. So stratified random sampling, you have to consider whether the population is homogeneous or not. In this sampling procedure, the population of n units is first divided into homogeneous subpopulations called strata. So there is what we call stratified random sampling is applicable if there is homogeneous with respect to the characteristics of interest, or there is what we call strata. And then a sample is drawn from each stratum. This type of sampling assures that all groups or strata are represented in the sample. Okay, steps in taking a stratified random sampling. You are going to classify the population into at least two homogeneous strata. So, yung i-classify at least two homogeneous strata. Like, for example, male, di ba? Male tanan, homogeneous na sila. And female tanan, homogeneous. So, you are going to classify it at least in two homogeneous strata. The basis for classification must be closely related to the variable of interest. Suppose we are interested to determine the student's opinion on tuition fee increase. It may be logical to subdivide the population of the students by income of parents. Pwede, di ba? I-classify nyo sila by income of parents as to economic status. College or by year level, di ba? Grade 11, grade 12, or by tribe, or a combination of this, as long as they are really homogeneous homogeneous respondents, diba? They have the same, they have common characteristic. Now, out from classifying at least two homogeneous strata, you have to draw a sample from each stratum by simple or systematic random sampling. So, si stratified random sampling, magamit si simple o si systematic random sampling. Ang kalahian lang is, i-classify daan ni stratified random sampling. Yang i-stratify daan, yang i-classify, ang characteristics dapat the same, di ba? Each stratum must have the same characteristics before drawing a sample, di ba? Before drawing a sample to represent the entire stratum. Now, how many shall we take from each stratum? That is the next question. How many shall we take from each stratum? Like, for example, your respondents are the entire senior high school. You categorize it according to strand, di ba? Now, pila man ang kuhaonin mo sa STEM, pila kuhaonin mo sa UMS, pila kuhaonin mo sa ABN. So we will be applying proportional allocation, di ba? Sample sizes for proportional allocation. This is if the size of n of the population is divided into k homogeneous populations or strata of sizes n1, n2, n3 until nk, then the sample size to be taken from each stratum I, the stratum I, is obtained using the formula where n sub I, small n sub I is equals to capital N sub I divided by n, or the population, times the sample, where f or I is equals to 1, 2 until k. Now, note, if n sub I is not a whole number, then it is rounded off to the nearest whole number. Example. The manager of girls' dormitory wants to learn how the students feel about the dorm services. The students were classified according to the following scheme. So they are classified according to level: freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Now, in freshman, there are 220 students. In sophomore, there are 195 students. In junior, there are 163 students. In senior, there are 150 students. All in all, the population is 728 students. If we use proportional allocation to select stratified random sample of size 40, take note, ang kuhaonin mo is 40. The sample size is 40. Diba? The sample size is 40. How large a sample must be taken from each stratum? So each classification refers to each stratum. Now 40 ang imong kuhaon sa kinatibuk-an. So pila imong kuhaon sa freshman, pila imong kuhaon sa sophomore, pila kuhaon mo sa junior, pila kuhaon mo sa senior. Nakadepende po na sa number of students, diba? So we will compute. The solution will be, okay, since sample size is equals to 40, and n, or the population, is equals to 220 plus 195 plus 163 plus 150 is equals to 728. Then n sub I, so sa n sub I is for um, n sub I refers to the sample, the number of sample to be taken out from each stratum or each classification. Now, n sub I refers to the number of population to be taken out from freshmen, diba? So n sub I um, is small n sub I, small n sub 1 is equals to um, capital N sub 1 divided by population times n. So 220. So n sub 1 is equals to n sub 1 is equals to 220, diba? The population, the total number of freshmen is 220, this one. And then the population is 728, this one, times 40, which is a sample size. Now the result is 12.088. Now since it is not whole number, it will be rounded off to the nearest whole number. 12.088 is equals to 12. That means 12 will be taken from, 12 will be taken from freshmen. Next is n sub 2, 195 divided by 728 times 40, 10.7714. It will be rounded off to the nearest whole number, so it will become 11. So out from 195 sophomore, 11 will be taken as sample. Now n sub 3, 168, so 9, and then n sub 4 is 8. So 9 and 8. So if we are going to total it, 12 plus 11 plus 9 plus 8 is equals to 40. So that is how stratified random sampling done. And then it uses proportional allocation. So this is now the number of students to be taken from freshman, from sophomore, from junior, and from senior. This is now the total number of sample, or the sample size. This is the population size. Is that clear? Next is cluster random sampling. See, cluster random sampling, it is useful in selecting sample when blocks in a community or city are occupied by heterogeneous groups. So cluster random sampling is applicable if the population is composed of heterogeneous groups. Unlike kay heterogeneous siya, dili na ito ma-apply si stratified. Diba? Stratified is for homogeneous. Now, si cluster random sampling, it is applicable if it is useful in selecting sample when blocks in a community or city are occupied by heterogeneous groups, meaning groups that are not the same. It assumes that the population is naturally separated by groups or clusters. So, assuming that the population is separated in terms of groups or in terms of clusters. The number of clusters are selected randomly, and then all or parts of the units within the selected clusters are included in the sample. Steps in taking cluster sampling. Divide the population area into clusters. So you are going to divide it according to the number of clusters. Select randomly few of these clusters. Select randomly few of these clusters. And choose all the elements from the cluster selected, or select only a portion of it to represent the entire cluster. Example, suppose the population of a study is residents of a condominium in a large city. If there are 10 condominium buildings in this city, the researcher can select 2 buildings randomly from the 10 and interview all or a subsample of the residents from these buildings. So instead of you're going to conduct interview and to all 10 condominium buildings, so by using cluster sampling, you can only select 2, diba? 2 buildings selected randomly, diba? Through by cluster, 2 cluster to represent the entire 10 condominium buildings or the residents of these buildings. Next, suppose an organization wishes to find out which sports senior students are participating in the Philippines. Take note, large area, Philippines. It would be too costly and would take too long to survey every student or even some students from every school. Instead, 100 schools are randomly selected. Instead of interviewing all the students or all schools, you selected only 100 schools. There were 100 schools are randomly selected from all over the Philippines, and these schools are considered to be clusters. So, you must lang i-clusterize, and then you only select 100 schools, diba, as the cluster, and then every senior student in these 100 schools is surveyed. In effect, students in a sample of 100 schools represent all senior students in the Philippines. That is how cluster random sampling done, or cluster sampling. Last is multi-stage random sampling. So multi-stage random sampling is applicable or useful in nationwide surveys or any large-scale surveys involving big universe. It is applicable magamit na si multi-stage random sampling kung dako na kayo ang population, like entire nationwide surveys. Like for example, the survey conducted by the SWSS, diba, the Social Weather Survey Station, diba? Pulse Asia, so mga nationwide surveys na sila. If you notice, they represent the entire Philippines or the whole Filipino community. However, it only composed of 1,200 individuals, diba? 1,200 sample. Then pila ta ka milyon, diba? 1-2 ang ikuha. They are using multi-stage random sampling. So it's a multi-stage random sampling, they can check stages, diba? This involves several stages, sometimes using different sampling procedures. It is the combination of all probability sampling. It involves several stages, and then using different sampling procedures. Siguro, nagamit niya yung cluster, nagamit si systematic, gamit si stratified, o si simple random sampling. Multi-stage random sampling. Example is the Pulse Asia, SWS. So, multi-stage na sila. Now, elements of probability sampling. So we have elements to consider in probability sampling. Margin of error, the confidence level, the population size, and the response distribution. When I say margin of error also is applicable once in determining your sample size. Diba? The margin of error, the amount of error that your research could tolerate based on the population and the sample size. So the amount of error that your research could tolerate, that is the margin of error. So usually, the amount of error that research could tolerate, so 5%, so 10% margin of error. So later, I will show to you how to compute a number of the sample size through Sloven's formula through different margin of error. And I will tell you the standard percentage of margin of error, the amount of error that the research could tolerate. Now, confidence level, it is the amount of uncertainty, diba, the research could tolerate. Now, if natay amount of error to could tolerate, diba, napatay research also has the amount of uncertainty could tolerate, and that is called confidence level. So, by percentage pud na siya, diba, the amount of uncertainty. Now, population size, it refers to all the number of potential respondents in a given universe. Response distribution of the respondents based on their characteristics. Okay, next type of sampling procedure is non-probability sampling. So, wala na siya element, wala na siyang gamit og margin of error, response to population size. Ano na siya? Di siya particularly sa population size, and then non-probability ang pamaagi, diba? Most often for qualitative researches. Now, non-probability sampling designs are most often used for qualitative researches, since you cannot generalize if such designs are used for your research. Types of non-probability sampling includes propositive sampling, convenience sampling, quota sampling, and snowball sampling. We'll start with convenience sampling. Convenience sampling, from the term convenience. So the researcher is looking for the respondents of the study at their own convenience. Diba? Respondents are chosen based on what is easily accessible or suitable for the researchers. Meaning, the way researchers select respondents, nakadepende sa ilahang accessibility, diba? Easy accessibility and suitability of the researchers. Usually, the researcher chooses those that are readily available, nearby, or willing to participate. So usually, ang ginapili niya researcher, those are readily available, nearby, or willing to participate. So, convenience sampling. Isa to ilang panalitan, customers ila sa usa ka store. So, di nila isa-isahon og adto a customer. Maghulat sila sa store like kinsa ang available sila ang ilahang interview. That is convenience sampling. Example, a convenience of sample of homes for door-to-door interviews might include houses where people are at home, di ba? You only include those people who are at home. So, katong wala silang balay, so dito ma-appeal. So, convenience sampling. Houses with no dogs, di ba? So, di po nang interview ka tapos pakan pala kang iro. So, consider nimo ang imong convenience. Houses near the street, first floor apartments, and houses with friendly people. So, researchers can select, di ba, who are the respondents of the study based on their own convenience. Convenience sampling. Next, quota sampling. Di ba? From the term quota, in this type of sampling, naa kay quota nga i-meet. Di ba? The respondents are chosen based on a quota, whether or not you conduct a probability or non-probability sampling. This appears to be similar to a stratified random sampling in which certain population subclasses such as age, group, gender, or geographic region are used as strata. However, instead of using random sampling from each stratum, the researcher uses a non-random sampling method to gather data from one stratum until the desired quota of samples is filled. So it's often linked with stratified random sampling where you are going to categorize it according to homogeneous classification. However, si quota sampling, wala siya nagamit og random sampling. It only uses non-random sampling to gather data. Diba? Dili ni kailangan i-compute si proportional allocation. Diba? Si quota sampling. Na kay quota, like, ang quota is the sample size 100. Diba? And then, 100 and then, through convenience sampling, ma-meet ni mong quota, that is already quota sampling. Diba? Quota sampling. Example, in quota sampling, you are going to interview 100 students of Mindanao State University, Buug. You don't need to go from one college to another, di ba? Kinsa imong makitaan dara, di ba, through convenience sampling. Basta estudyante sa MSU. And then, imong interviewon, imong taga-questionnaire or imong interviewon, and then, once ma-reach nimo ang number, ang required number or the quota, okay na dayon. That is quota sampling. You don't need to interview all of the students. Purposive sampling. Purposive sampling, respondents are chosen based on the purpose or objective of your research. So, purposive, nakadepende sa purpose or objective of your research. You do not need to have strict protocol in identifying samples since randomly chosen respondents might not have experienced the phenomenon that you want to observe. So, dili siya stricto as to the randomly selecting the respondents. In fact, purposive sampling is called judgment sampling. Nakadepende sa researcher how the researcher judge, 'di ba? Whether kana siya nga respondents kinahanglan ba na siya or kana ba siya ang suitable nga respondents or not, depending on the purpose or objective of your research. Diba? The elements selected for the sample are chosen by the judgment of the researcher. Researchers often believe that they can obtain a representative sample by using sound judgment or purposely choose as to who can provide the best information to achieve the objectives of the study, which will result in saving time and money. No. In purposive sampling, for example, purposive sampling. Like for example, your respondents are employees, and then employees compensation has something to do with benefits. You don't need to, by applying purposive sampling, dili ka siya strict as to identifying randomly chosen respondents. So mangita ka og kanang tao nga mo fit na makahatag sa imong og data, di ba? Quality data. So, pwede ka madto ka sa Office of the HR, adto ka sa Office of the hiring manager or the branch manager. So, sila ang makahatag sa imo. Meaning, you choose your respondents based on the purpose of your research. Di ba? Based on your own judgment. Di ba? Purposive sampling, depending on the purpose of your research. Last will be snowball sampling. Snowball sampling, the survey of subjects of snowball sampling are selected based on referral. This is also known as referral sampling from other survey representatives or selecting a sample using networks. The researcher identifies a person who fits the profile of subjects for the study, and that person who is being selected by researcher become a part of the sample. The researcher then asks this person for the names and locations of others who would also fit the profile of subjects for the study. This process is continued until the required number in terms of the information being sought has been reached. So like for example, 100 imuhang sample size by using snowball sampling, so referral. Example, a researcher wanted to study the factors why some students occasionally use prohibited drugs. He intended to get 50 students, but he only knew 5 students. Now, mag-start siya, unsa niya pag-reach ang 50 students. By getting the cooperation of these 5 students, he was referred to other drug users, who in turn also provide additional contacts. In this way, he was able to get sufficient number of students he needed. So, another example, kuan kay hadlo kay akong example about the usage of drugs, prohibited drugs. No. Another example is that um, um, you wanted to interview um, 10 makeup artists, 'di ba, in a university campus. And then you only 3, 'di ba? 3 makeup artists as to their job, and then so nanay nag-study pud ana sa makeup artists, 'di ba? Their academic status as well as naapektuhan ba silang racket. So nanakitulo na hibalan. So for you to reach the 10, so these 3 will refer to another person, di ba? Like si number 1, i-refer na ko si kuan o makeup artist pa na siya. So kato iyang gi-refer, mo na po tayong imuhang respondents. Inana si snowball sampling, referral. Any questions? If you have questions, feel free to ask through the comment section, or you can message me through our Facebook group chat, or you can type your question in the in our Facebook group wherein this video lecture will be posted. Thank you and God bless us all.